The text came in on a Wednesday afternoon while I was deadheading roses in the backyard. The roses I'd planted along the fence line 3 summers ago, the ones that were finally coming in the way I'd always pictured them. My phone buzzed on the patio table. I set down my clippers, pulled off one garden glove, and read it. Mother's estate settled this morning. $2.8 million total. I've had the papers drawn up. You sign the postnuptial by Friday or I file Monday. The house goes back to the family. This was never really yours. I read it 3 times. Not because I didn't understand it, because I was memorizing every word. Then I put my phone back in my pocket, finished deadheading the roses, and went inside to make coffee. Good afternoon. This is Hannah, and I'm so glad you're here. Please stay until the end. Because this is a story about what happens when a man decides money makes him untouchable, and about the one thing he forgot, the thing that cost him everything. My name is Iris. I'm 64 years old, a retired registered nurse with 31 years in the ICU, and until that Wednesday afternoon in my garden, I believed my second chapter was a good one. My first marriage had ended years before, amicably and without drama. I raised my daughter mostly on my own after that, worked double shifts for years, saved carefully. I wasn't looking for anyone. I'd made a full life on my own terms, and I was content with it. Then I met my husband at a church fundraiser in Beaumont, Texas, 9 years ago. He was widowed, owned a small agricultural supply business he'd built up over 2 decades, and carried himself with the kind of quiet steadiness I found genuinely attractive. He brought me coffee without being asked. He remembered, the next time we talked, what I'd told him about my daughter. Small things. But I've always believed it's the small things that tell you the truth about a person. We married 14 months after we met. Small ceremony, just family. His mother sat in the front row. His sister drove up from Dallas. My daughter stood beside me, in a cream-colored dress she'd picked out herself. It was a warm day in October, and the pecans were dropping in the yard, and I thought, this is a good beginning. When we married, he lived in his family's old farmhouse outside of town. 3 bedrooms, original fixtures from the 1970s. A kitchen that hadn't seen an update since his parents first bought the place. The inspector's report used the word tired 3 times in 2 pages. But the bones were solid. Good wood, good land, big wraparound porch with a view of the back pasture. And there were pecan trees in the yard and east-facing windows that let in the best morning light I'd ever seen in a house. It was his childhood home. I understood what that meant to him. I loved it myself, honestly. Not for what it was, but for what I could see it becoming. What I did next was entirely my choice. No one asked me to. No one pressured me. I took $187,000 from my own savings. Money I had built slowly over 3 decades of night shifts and holiday pay, and 20 years of never buying anything I didn't actually need, and I put it into that house. New kitchen from the studs out, 2 updated bathrooms, full rewire of the east wing, central HVAC to replace the window units that rattled all night in the summer, hardwood floors refinished throughout, a new back porch with proper footings. I hired every contractor myself. Every invoice came to me directly. Every receipt went into a manila folder in my filing cabinet, the thick kind, labeled in my handwriting, organized chronologically. 31 years of nursing had made documentation a reflex. You write things down. You keep records. You date everything. I never imagined I'd be grateful for that habit the way I eventually was. The first 2 years after the renovation, the house felt alive in a way it hadn't before. We had people over. His sister came for Thanksgiving. My daughter brought her boyfriend, now her husband, and they sat on the new back porch until late at night with iced tea while the fireflies came out in the pasture. My husband would put his arm around me in the kitchen and say things like, "You made this place beautiful," and he meant it then. I believe he meant it then. Things shifted gradually, the way things do when someone is deciding something they haven't told you yet. I noticed it the way a nurse notices a patient's vitals trending before they've fully turned. A slight change in pattern that doesn't mean anything definite yet, but means something. A new truck in the driveway he mentioned only after the fact. Business trips to San Antonio that materialized on the calendar with no real explanation. His phone, which used to sit wherever he set it down, now always landed face down. He started showering as soon as he came home from work, instead of before leaving in the morning. I noticed. I am not a woman who doesn't notice things. I simply wasn't ready yet to say out loud what I suspected, because saying it would make it real, and I still hoped I was wrong. Then his mother passed in January. She was 87 years old, and it wasn't unexpected. She'd been in declining health for 2 years, and we'd made the drive to see her nearly every other weekend near the end. He seemed to grieve, or he did something that resembled it. But mostly what I observed in those weeks was him on the phone with estate attorneys, speaking in a clipped, impatient voice I'd never heard him use before. His mother, it turned out, had considerably more than the family had ever discussed openly. Land, mineral rights, an investment portfolio his father had quietly built over 50 years and never once talked about at the dinner table. When it all settled, the total to $2.8 million. The day the estate cleared, he didn't come home for dinner. He texted from somewhere unspecified that he'd be late. I made a plate and ate alone at the kitchen table, the table I'd chosen for that kitchen, solid oak, heavy enough to last. And I went to bed at a reasonable hour. The next morning he was already gone when I woke up. And that afternoon, while I was in the garden I'd planted and tended for 9 years, his message arrived. This was never really yours. I finished my coffee, slow and deliberate. I took the manila folder from the filing cabinet. I packed one bag, not in a panic, not with shaking hands, just carefully, the way you pack when you know you're going to need to think clearly for a while. I called my daughter and told her I was coming. She had the door open before I finished walking up her front path. One look at my face. "Mom, tell me." We sat at her kitchen table and I told her everything. The text, the postnuptial demand, the timing of it, all of it landing within weeks of his mother's estate settling. Her expression moved through about 6 things in 30 seconds and landed hard on fury. He sent that by text, 9 years, and he sent a text? He did. "Mom, you need an attorney, first thing tomorrow." I know. I set the folder on the table. But tonight, I need you to help me remember everything I've ever contributed to that house and that marriage. Every detail. We stayed up past midnight. She made more coffee, and I made lists. Every contractor, every receipt total, every year. My daughter had a clearer memory of some of the early renovation than I did. She'd come out and help me choose the kitchen tiles the summer before she got married. She remembered the exact conversation where I'd told her what the total cost had come to. After she went to bed, I opened my laptop and started reading. Texas Family Law, Separate Property versus Community Property. The legal reimbursement doctrine, the legal principle that said if you spend your separate property funds improving community or separate property, you retain the right to recoup that amount. $187,000. Documented. In my name, the law had a name for what I'd done, and it wasn't nothing. I also read about commingling. If inherited funds are deposited into a joint marital account, even briefly, they lose their separate character under Texas law. They become community property subject to equal division. I wrote the word commingling on my legal pad and circled it twice. Miss Carver was a partner at a family law firm downtown, recommended by a nurse I'd worked alongside for 15 years. She had silver-streaked hair, reading glasses she kept on a chain, and the kind of stillness that meant she was always thinking ahead of the conversation. When I sat across from her desk and opened the folder, she picked up one receipt, examined it, set it down, then looked at me. "You kept everything." 31 years in the ICU, I said. "You chart everything." Something shifted almost imperceptibly in her expression. "Good. Let's get started." Within 48 hours, she'd filed a counter-response to his divorce petition, which he had indeed filed on Monday, exactly when he'd threatened, and sent a formal demand for full financial disclosure. Every account, every asset, every dollar of his mother's estate, and a complete accounting of how he'd handled it since settlement. She also told me to hire a private investigator, an investigator who came recommended through her office, a former sheriff's deputy named by reputation as someone meticulous and discreet. I met with him once, gave him what I knew, and he went to work. What he found came back in stages, each one a little worse than the last. My husband had not been going to San Antonio for business. Her name was Tammy, younger than me by a good margin. They'd apparently been seeing each other for at least 18 months, which meant the relationship had been ongoing while his mother was in her final decline, while I was driving with him every other weekend to visit her in the care facility, while I was sitting beside him at her funeral. The investigator had found a rental apartment across town, paid with a new private account my husband had opened 2 weeks after the estate settled. He had spent money on jewelry, on travel, on what appeared to be a very comfortable new life he was building that had no room in it for me. "How much total since the estate settled?" I asked. The investigator turned a page. 6 weeks, just over $91,000. In Texas, that's called dissipation of marital assets. Courts take it seriously. The real turning point came on a Tuesday morning, 3 weeks into the process. The investigator called and asked me to come in. When I sat across from him, he turned his laptop to face me. Tammy had a public Instagram account. I scrolled through it. There were photographs of her in my kitchen, the white shaker cabinets I'd spent 2 weeks selecting samples for, the farmhouse sink I'd had shipped from a supplier in Nashville, the pendant lights over the island that had taken me 4 months to find at the right price. She was holding a coffee mug, head tilted, smiling. The caption read, "Settling into our beautiful home. Fresh start, new life." Our beautiful home. I kept scrolling, her hand extended toward the camera. A ring, large, elaborate. The caption beneath it, he finally asked, "I've never been so happy. Can't wait to start forever." He had proposed to her. In my house. With money that, as it turned out, he had not been as careful about keeping separate as he believed. I called Ms. Carver before I was even back in my car. "He deposited the inheritance into our joint checking account," I told her. "I have the statement. It sat there for 11 days before he moved it to his private account." A pause. "Then how much?" "The full amount. He moved it all through the joint account first." 11 days of commingling. I could hear her writing. "That converts the entire inheritance to community property under Texas law. He handed us everything." Another pause. "I'm filing for emergency relief tomorrow morning. We'll ask the court to remove both of them from your property immediately and freeze all accounts tied to the estate funds." The emergency hearing was Thursday. I wore the same navy blazer I'd worn to nursing board presentations for years. Professional, composed, no statement being made except I take this seriously. Miss Carver had coached me. Answer what's asked. Don't react to him across the room. Let me do the talking. The judge was a woman in her late 50s with reading glasses on a beaded chain and an expression that suggested she had heard every version of every lie that had ever been told in a courtroom. She reviewed our motion packet, then his response, then set her glasses down. "Mister," she looked at my husband, "you moved a third party into the marital residence while proceedings were pending. The residence, that is, according to these documents, subject to a reimbursement claim by your wife." His attorney, younger than I expected, nervous energy coming off him, stood. "Your Honor, my client believed he had a legitimate interest in the property given his family history with it. The reimbursement claim is documented and appears valid on its face." The judge's voice didn't rise. It didn't need to. He also spent $91,000 on the third party in the 6 weeks following the estate settlement, from funds that commingled with community accounts for 11 days before transfer. "Your Honor, the commingling was inadvertent." Counsel. Inadvertent or not, commingling occurred. She looked at my husband directly. "Did you deposit the full inheritance into your joint marital account?" A long pause, temporarily. "For 11 days. Silence. "Yes or no, please." "Yes." Her order was swift. 72 hours to vacate the property, both of them. All accounts containing inheritance funds frozen pending full discovery. Temporary support set at a monthly amount that kept me stable. I walked out of that courthouse and stood in the afternoon light for a moment before I could make myself move toward the parking lot. We won round one, but Miss Carver had told me now he retaliates. She was right. His sister reached out 3 days later and asked to meet. We sat in a coffee shop near her workplace, and she looked uncomfortable from the moment she arrived. She stirred her latte without drinking it. "He wants to offer you a settlement," she said finally. $250,000, cash, clean break, no trial. "And the house?" She looked at the table. "He'd buy out your renovation claim as part of the $250. My renovation cost $187,000 9 years ago, not adjusted for inflation or the appreciation on the property since. The house just appraised at $487,000. I kept my voice even. He spent $91,000 on Tammy in 6 weeks. He proposed to her in my kitchen. I picked up my bag. No. She left looking like she regretted making the trip. The support group my daughter found for me met on Wednesday evenings at a community center not far from her house. 8 women in folding chairs with bad coffee from a drip machine in the corner. Retired schoolteacher who'd found out about her husband's second family the same week she was diagnosed with diabetes. A woman in her 40s whose husband had gambled away their retirement without telling her. A grandmother who'd been served divorce papers at her own birthday party. I am a private person. I don't talk about my business in groups. But I walked into that room and I talked, and nobody looked at me with pity and nobody looked at me with judgment. They looked at me with recognition. "You kept the receipts," one of them said. She was 71, 3 years past her own divorce. "That's not nothing. That's everything." I went back every Wednesday until the trial. The trial came in late April. Miss Carver spent 6 weeks preparing it with the same methodical precision I'd spent building my renovation file. She deposed my husband for 4 hours. She subpoenaed the phone records, which surfaced the messages between him and Tammy from the months before his mother's death, messages in which Tammy had written, "Once the estate is sorted, we can finally stop hiding." They'd been planning this for a long time. At trial, she laid it all out in sequence. The renovation receipts, totaled and itemized. The estate deposits into the joint account, 11 days, $2.8 million, documented on 3 consecutive bank statements. The $91,000 in dissipation. The Instagram photographs. The ring, purchased from a jeweler downtown for $38,000, added to the dissipation total. She called me to testify. I walked to the stand, was sworn in, sat down, and folded my hands in my lap the way I used to when I had to deliver difficult news to a family in the ICU. Present, clear, not braced for impact but not flinching either. She walked me through the renovation year by year, which contractors, which phases, which accounts the money came from. I answered precisely, without embellishment. "And when did you first become aware of your husband's relationship with this other woman?" "When I saw her photograph on social media," I said, standing in my kitchen. The courtroom was quiet for a moment. "The kitchen you paid to renovate." "The kitchen I designed, contracted, and paid for, yes." His attorney's cross-examination tried to paint me as a bitter woman making a property grab, using the law as a weapon out of spite. I looked at him calmly. "I'm not asking for anything I didn't put in," I said. "I'm asking for documentation of what I contributed, evaluated honestly by the court. That's all." When my husband testified, Ms. Carver's cross was surgical. Every line in the timeline, every dollar amount, every date. She walked him through his own bank statements, his own transfer records, his own new account. "You testified the inheritance was entirely your separate property. But on March 14th, you deposited the full $2.8 million into the joint account you shared with your wife. Yes or no?" "It was a temporary. Yes or no?" "Yes." "Your wife had equal access to that account during those 11 days. That's how joint accounts. Yes or no?" "Yes." "Thank you." She set the bank records down. No further questions. Tammy testified, composed at first, then increasingly rattled as Miss Carver pulled out the phone messages one by one and read the dates aloud. The judge read several of them into the record herself. Her expression didn't change, but she took her reading glasses off and set them down with a deliberateness that said something. The ruling came the next morning. The judge began with my reimbursement claim. My $187,000 in documented separate property funds spent on the marital home was valid and provable. Given the home's current appraised value, I was entitled to full reimbursement with accumulated adjustment from the date of each expenditure to be paid from the proceeds of the property sale before any remaining equity was divided. Then the inheritance. Because of the 11-day commingling in the joint account, the full $2.8 million was treated as community property subject to equal division. My husband's share would be reduced by the $91,000 in documented dissipation, plus the $38,000 ring, bringing his deduction to $129,000 off his half. Then spousal support, permanent until remarriage or further order. Then attorney's fees, to be paid by him in full, given the totality of his conduct. He sat at the defense table with his hands flat on the surface, very still. Tammy was in the gallery behind him. She stood up before the gavel came down and walked out without looking back. She didn't look at him once on her way to the door. I sat in the courtroom for a moment after it cleared, just to let it settle. My daughter found me there and sat down next to me and didn't say anything for a while. The afternoon light came through the tall windows and fell across the empty benches. "Mom." "I'm okay," I said. "And I meant it the way you mean it when you've come out the other side of something and you can feel solid ground under your feet again." 6 months later, I'm in a bright 2-bedroom rental near my daughter's neighborhood, with herb pots on every windowsill and a watercolor set on the kitchen table that I haven't touched since nursing school. I've started painting again, just small things. The view from the window, the pecan tree in the park across the street. My hands remember the motion even after all these years. Through his sister, who calls occasionally with news I don't ask for, I've learned that Tammy left within a month of the ruling. The man she'd been planning a future with looked different, with half an inheritance, a court-ordered support payment, and a legal bill attached. He lives somewhere across town now. I don't drive that way. My daughter and I went to Savannah in October. 4 days, just the two of us. We ate at places with no reservations required, walked everywhere, sat on a porch one evening with glasses of sweet tea, and watched the sun go down over the river until the streetlights came on. I am 64 years old. I spent 9 years putting in $187,000 and every weekend and every decision and every ounce of my attention into rebuilding a house I believed was going to be our home. As it turned out, I was just learning what I was made of. That text message, "This was never really yours," didn't break me. It showed me exactly who I was. A woman who keeps her receipts. A woman who knows the difference between what she built and what someone else decided to take credit for. A woman who sat in a garden and read a cruel message and thought, "You forgot something," and then went inside and made coffee and started planning. Your worth is not determined by who chooses to see it. It's in the record. It always was. Thank you for listening. This is Hannah. I'll see you in the next story.